Okay, so you guys know that this is the second go, right? The medium is the message, and the medium here is the stream is its own kind of space, and we are here tonight to talk about what kind of space it is with Mark Stahlman, who is the founder, one of the founders of the Center for the Study of Digital Life. We are here living the digital. Welcome to the Mosaic Ark. Okay, we're live. My Southern hostess self is dying. Oh no, I had all the plates set out and everybody, the guests showed up and it wasn't right. Welcome. now you know what it's like really sailing on the Mosaic Ark when we're like in the background just scampering around trying to make sure that all the animals are in their cages and everybody's got some food and the dove is not going to drown the first time we send her out. Anyway, I should say, since this is recording too, and I'm still hoping that Fat's not around. Fat is our and VA Boston and Annie are talking in Telegram and not watching us live right now. These are all the other digital spaces, like whether or not we're southern enough with the Yankees and the anyway. Mark found me some years ago wanting to talk about Marshall McLuhan, and I'd like him simply to explain to you all why tonight. And we're going to talk about Marshall McLuhan and what we need to understand about the digital environment that we are inhabiting now, which we are doing live for you to demonstrate the difficulties of what it's like. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Rachel and Kimberly. It turns out Marshall McLuhan had one very simple idea, that our psychology is shaped by the environment in which we live, the media environment in which we live. This turns out to mean practically that we are formed in what used to be called grammar school. So whatever the grammar school was when we were pre-pubescent, because puberty obviously totally turns the boat around and spins it and so forth. So you're pretty much, as a colleague of mine once said, by the time you hit puberty, you're already out of the oven and you're on the counter cooling down for all the fun that is to come. And that period, grammar school, changes. And therefore, we change. He was a fascinating fellow on many accounts, rebellious from an early stage, grew up in Canada, wound up with a big-time scholarship, Canadian-British scholarship. Oxford rejected him. He wound up at Cambridge. And so he was a classmate of the many Cambridge communists who wound up, in fact, becoming Russian spies.
Oh, wow.
Soviets.
Oh, wow.
He was a classmate of them, and he came away saying there's only two choices at Cambridge in the early 30s. Either you're a commie or a Catholic. And and he converted at the age of 24, and that defined the rest of his life. Quite remarkable. In particular, he discovered so much and was so perceptive about this that he persists to this day. So we're very fortunate at the Center for the Study of Digital Life and our two major projects, Exogenous Inc., which is a geopolitical advisory firm, and Trivium University, where I'm teaching classes every Wednesday night. You're all invited to contact us and join. We're all very fortunate tonight to be talking about Marshall McLuhan and his impact.
So he was in Cambridge. I was saying in our previous. So all the guys in the chat are always saying this was just a clever ploy to make us do thumbs up twice. Yes, we're doubling our engagement with the chat by having you guys. So welcome. We've got several. So Cyril Nil Mill is all a ploy to make us thumbs up twice. And Peter Berkman, hello, welcome. It's great to see you guys. The intro to McLuhan and the sense of being in grammar school. Yes, that is. Did you? I mean, if you could say some more about what he did in Cambridge, that would help us understand why he's talking about grammar school and sort of his journey goes from being not commie but Catholic. But there's a lot more to it, as I understand now. But
well, obviously, I guess in an Anglophonic world in the 30s, linguistics were enormously important.
Mm-hmm.
So he wound up with instructors, teachers who were heading off in that direction. So we all know the names. Wittgenstein winds up being not immediately adjacent to McLuhan, but many others were. There was a whole movement from I.A. Richards, who was one of his instructors,
right,
in particular towards something called Basic English, which was being promoted by the Rockefellers in China as a way to globalize the English language. That was one of his instructors. He was smack dab in the middle of all these controversies
mm-hmm.
Of that time, and wound up writing a remarkable dissertation entitled The Classical Trivium. It began really on a whole different note. He was examining the role of Thomas Nash in Elizabethan England. That winds up being almost the appendix to the core of what's going on here. But his basic thesis was that there was this alternating phenomenon in Western civilization within the context of the trivium, which, as we recall, is grammar, rhetoric, and dialectics. The way he would have constructed this was there was a battle going on between grammar and dialectics. And that battlefield was rhetoric. And so as this battle back and forth, he was primarily interested in grammar. Published a fascinating article about the new languages, for instance, as a result of his Ford Foundation grant in the 50s. Implying that every technology is a language with its own grammar. That led to the view that we are shaped by the grammar in which we grow up. And there's really not much we can do about it later in life. All of which leads to a pretty simple conclusion on our part, which is that we ain't seen nothing yet. As digital takes over in our lives,
right,
we're heading towards generations that are more purely digital in their formation than anyone before.
Do you think that's happening faster than it did 50 years ago? Things are speeding up?
No, I think actually the generational phenomenon and the fact that you're only 10 years old once is really the timing, the chronology of all of this. Now, of course, there's babies born every day. So there might not be. So where is that 10-year point? And it could be varying. But I suspect that it takes a long time, takes multiple generations for these sorts of transitions to occur. We're already well into this phenomenon, of course. So the difference between what the marketers call Gen Z, which is topping out in the mid-20s now, and the previous millennial generation, generally offset by 15 years by the marketing people, is dramatic. And it is only going to get more dramatic. So all of these proclamations about the world we live in and good, bad, superficial, all very superficial about what's actually going on here. We've had a remarkable shift in underlying environmental technology from television to digital, which in psychological terms, subconscious terms, Aristotelian, Thomistic, faculty psychology terms, means a radical shift from imagination to memory. This is about as dramatic as could happen. It's happening to all of our inner senses. And so the shift between the millennials, if you will, Gen Y, and Gen Z, XYZ. Now we're going into alpha and beta. It turns out that the shift between just those two generations, which is on the cusp of digital technology coming in, is quite dramatic. It is the most severe, immediate, generational shift that has been measured or observed since people have been drawing these generations. So we're in a as I often would say, we are no longer pushing a rock up a hill, as Sisyphus did, realizing, of course, it would roll back down and crush him overnight. We're on the other side of the hill now. And so now what tends to happen in our lives are avalanches and landslides. What happened a week ago with Donald Trump was a landslide.
Okay, this is like this. I'm just going to have to back you up a little bit and say this is why we invited you on tonight, because I had posted something on November 5th about the election, and you responded in my Facebook, and I'm like, no, I need him now, right? But the thing is, I've read enough McLuhan now to realize things that I think were probably needing to unpack for people a bit. And it's like once you've read enough McLuhan, you're just in the mystic, and it's great. And we know, like, no, it's like I've and the thing is, since I met you in the Zoom conversation that you invited me to some years ago, it
turns out that Marshall McLuhan's closest advisor on writing his dissertation had in turn written his own dissertation on a mystic. And so the connection between
totally
mysticism and McLuhan is quite appropriate.
But there variety of things that people are still not fully appreciating about McLuhan. One, that as you started with saying, he went and studied in Cambridge. He studied, in fact, medieval education, which I was, he studied medieval education. He wrote the dissertation. He came back to the United States. He was teaching in St. Louis, meets Walter Ong, who I've narrated previously had some effect on my education via one of my teachers in undergraduate. But the sort of cascade effect of McLuhan's insights was the origin of it was completely hidden because his dissertation wasn't published until 2006. So there's this fascinating gap in medieval studies, which he actually made a significant contribution to, but it came too late to affect medieval studies, right? So I find I was reading his classic trivium study, which he wrote in the 40s, which doesn't come out until 2006, and it's like being in a time warp of its own, because when he was researching it in the 40s, there were all sorts of things about medieval education that were completely undocumented in the sense of they've been narrated so he finds himself having to do all that research in order to talk about the 16th century, which is what he had meant to be talking about. And the thing that he figured out about, now I can't remember whether it was the first version or the second version we were talking about now. Sorry, my memory is not great today. Where he's dealing with the battle between grammar and logic, and it plays out in rhetoric. For me, that was like this insight of, oh my gosh, that's what we've been missing. The conversation in medieval studies went in all these other directions between debates between monastic and scholastic, and the problem of, is there a 12th century Renaissance and such and so forth. If we'd had simply McLuhan's insight about the way in which
12th century. How about an 8th century?
Well, we kept doing that,
Renaissance?
right, too. But just that grammar as a training for the mind has a different sort of structuring effect from logic, and that rhetoric participates in both. And the things like that carry on the battles of the books in the 17th century and so forth, that it's like the Plato and Aristotle, perpetual dynamic that the West is caught in. We're also caught in this grammar dialectic with rhetoric appropriately playing both sides, both teams constantly, right? Whether or not, dialectically you're using.
And by the way, it turns out that the Chinese civilization has a parallel version, different, but still parallel. And the difference here is Confucius and Lao-Tzu. Taoism and Confucianism.
Okay, so this is, just simply unpacking that. This is still too tangled up for most people, I imagine, right? That we are caught in these action reactions, and it's not Hegelian dialectic. That's not. Maybe Hegelian dialectic comes out of it, but that we're caught at one level in these structuring ways of approaching. I don't even what's it. Grammar names, dialectic argues, right? And that simply that, whether you are in an academic field that is primarily descriptive and encyclopedic, the mosaic, right, that we love in our mosaic arc, or you're in an academic field that is primarily argumentative and proof based, right? So that you're in the sort of the what we tend to call science.
In order to achieve certain kinds of results. So the goals are quite different. There's a difference between trying to understand, and there's another version of this, which is to try to change, modify, and so this tension, and in this regard, we don't need to dig into this very far, but we have spent a great deal of time actually on Romano Guardini.
In your group.
Guardini's understanding about contraries that don't have to be resolved. So you're very accurately correct. McLuhan was deliberately anti-Hegelian.
Yes. Okay, so there's that first sort of underlying dynamic that he was able to describe, which is within the trivium itself, right? And this is actually helpful. And so we're thanks to Trump's election, and he's appointing right now, and he's going to abolish the Department of Education, yay, and send educational design back to the states and make it more local and stuff like that. But of course, everybody in education is instantly terrified that he's going to destroy education.
My guess is he's not going to eliminate the Department of Education, but anyway, we'll see what is recommended by the Doge folks.
Yes, the dog. The dog
Speaking
is
of rhetoric.
The dog. Yes. Okay. So if we go off on Donald Trump, maybe we'll have to hold him as an example, right? But the usual way that we argue in education is this, science versus humanities, right? It's or more appropriately quadrivium versus trivium, right? If it's the mathematic arts versus the language arts, and what.
It's C.P. Snow's two cultures. It's Oxford versus Cambridge.
Exactly.
Same old stuff.
And I'm actually giving a talk next week in Emerald College, where my brother is teaching, on exactly that. They're having this semester-long seminar on C.P. Snow's problem of the two cultures. So I've been reading a lot about that too.
Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Okay.
What's the competition between Oxford and Cambridge for somebody uneducated about it as myself?
Well, the basic competition is MI6.
Oh,
It's
Who,
these are always
that's
layers.
straightforward.
who gets to run British intelligence?
Oh, okay.
Is it?
British intelligence that believes themselves to be running the world,
Yeah.
and so there's always a competition
And that's
going on.
Cambridge. Is that
And
Cambridge or Oxford?
it depends on what
Well, Cambridge
time of day it is.
Cambridge would be mathematics, and Oxford would be verbal.
Well, I'm really fascinated
yes.
when you
and,
said
and
that.
in the time period, C.P. Snow was in charge of scientific deployment for the British Empire in World War II.
Okay.
And so he emerges from all of that with a kind of a left-wing, maybe more Trotskyist and Stalinist view of all of this stuff. And he gets at the end of the 1950s, and there's a competition going on. So what's happening in the intelligence community at the end of the 1950s? Well, why does there need to be a conflict? And the conflict was, and it was a very serious battle, it was between humans and machines.
Now we're getting there. Okay.
It was between what was called human intelligence, HUMINT, and SIGINT, signals intelligence. And definitively, the British shifted away from the humans towards the machines. So signals intelligence became the primary British contribution to the intelligence operations in the 1960s. And ultimately, that becomes the agency called Five Eyes. Five Eyes is centered at something called GCHQ, General Communications Headquarters, a big giant donut building in the middle of the forest in England, much like the Apple spaceship headquarters. And for me, the most literally, you won't believe this, Rachel, but this has been the single most amazing thing I've seen on television since Trump's election. And this was the way Rachel Maddow featured British intelligence as the primary victim of what had just happened here.
Oh, this is so good. Okay.
Try not to enjoy that too much.
Normally, people like Rachel Maddow have nothing to say at all. It's all totally superficial. And here she is saying on television,
saying the quiet part out loud. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah. What an odd thing to say.
This has just destroyed Five Eyes, she said.
In other words, I heard that.
I get all my, I'm Rachel Maddow. I'm the highest paid woman, if not the highest paid anchor on all of cable television. And I get all of my stuff from British intelligence. And now they won't talk to me anymore.
Okay, all right. This is great, right?
And now Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard
Britain,
as Director of National Intelligence. This is brilliant. This is beyond brilliant.
Okay, this is talk about hidden grammar. This is it.
That is crazy,
right? This is because I was just who was I listening to Tucker Carlson talk to? The problem. Oh, he's talking about the problem of the media, right? And where the media get other information, and whether or not it's the CIA. And Tucker has his dad in the CIA and things like that, and that too much of our media, in the sense of, well, we'll go to Walter Cronkite now. Here we go. And that's the way it was, right?
Right.
That too much of our media is, in fact, giving us intelligence. How did I change? I'm going to go. Forget that. I'm going back. Why did I start hearing myself again? We've never had these tech problems. Forget it. I can't show you images. We're just going to talk about this. Okay. So we'll go. We're getting the story now. McLuhan goes to Cambridge in the 40s. I mean, it's during the war, right? It
is during the war. And in fact, he shipped copies of his dissertation on 2 separate ships, because he thought it was highly likely one of them would be sunk.
Okay, so when he's thinking about the necessity of communication, it's not just that you're having trouble making your live stream work, right? It's actual. I mean, it's the physical network of the ships.
It's U-boats in the Atlantic, exactly.
Right. Okay, and in the middle of all of that, he's writing this incredibly complicated. It's like his dissertation really works on these two levels. One, there's this like the parent argument that's in the body of the text and then the footnotes. And unfortunately, Ginkgo Press made it completely unreadable because they published the footnotes in like the teeniest tiny type they could find. That there's this whole like the ocean subsurface proof that he's
the water above and the sand below.
Totally right.
The typography of this, yes, and indeed, and whether you put the footnotes at the back or on the same page, very important, particularly in this dissertation.
Okay, so and what he discovers, and this is I started all of this saying that when we usually think of the battle in education, it's between numbers and words, which we've now found out is also has this manifestation in the mid 20th century with the British intelligence between Oxford and Cambridge, but that we usually think of it as between the STEM fields and the humanities fields, the verbal fields, but that's wrong, right? That there's all sorts of layers.
That is completely wrong.
Completely
in fact,
wrong.
Every single version of separation, Cartesian dualism.
That yes.
And all the way through to these battles, national endowment for the humanities
Precisely.
and so forth. These battles that have been going on. This is fundamentally incorrect because it has deliberately disintegrated the human soul.
Very good. Yes. Yes.
The human soul is an integral expression, as Aristotle first described it in Peripsyche, or in Latin, the anima. The combination of form and matter, the necessary for existence of a substance, form and matter, was broken up. This is McLuhan's whole issue about the printing press.
Right.
McLuhan stops his PhD in Elizabethan England. He then passes along the recommendation to the man who had some influence on your training, Walter Ong,
Right.
S.J. Walter Ong, the Jesuit from St. Louis University, picked up on whose master's degree was supervised by McLuhan, then takes McLuhan's suggestion and winds up with his Harvard dissertation on Ramus and the end of dialogue. And so the distinction between a medieval world and a print-based world is carried forward in Ong's work. And this is where he comes up with secondary orality and a whole series of exercises. But this is important. So let me just for a moment mention Ong's phrase, secondary orality. Orality was meant to be the environment before writing, pre-literate. So Ong's primary thesis in orality and literacy was that orality had been brought forward, it had been retrieved, it had superseded the printing press.
Right.
And we lived in it seemed to be a highly literate sort of world, but it was really an oral world we were living in. So this retrieval of an earlier environment.
That we were living in it with the electric age, the orality. Okay.
Yes.
The secondary orality belongs to the electric age.
Correct.
Right.
And we're all familiar with this. I mean, all this fascination with anthropology, all this fascination with mythology,
Right.
this fascination with characteristics of the oral world, all the way down to strippers with their tattoos. This is all a oral retrieval, and it is kind of, once you take a look for it, it's sort of obvious. This is what we've been doing. We've been rehearsing a pre-literate world. Many people have written about post-literacy and so forth. That phenomenon, because no new environment can just spring up. It has to bring something forward. It has to retrieve something. Very important in the McLuhan construction of the trivium, which, by the way, was Marshall McLuhan's deliberate attempt to unseat a, I guess, left Hegelian view of synthesis. It's not the way it works in the McLuhan tetrad. So this is maybe something
You're going to need to
discuss
explain the tetrad too. Okay, so I'm just going to, I can do the footnotes. When the guys are saying in the chat they like the footnotes, so that's good. Okay, so we're in this. It's just to back up and saying it's not humanities versus STEM. Within the McLuhan understanding, it's actually there's tensions within the trivium between grammar and dialectic, which was great for me realizing. But to understand that the quadrivium includes music, right? So even our definition of what belongs in humanities, which usually includes music, has already got a mathematical element to it. So C.P. Snow, when he's making his argument in the 50s about the literature professors and their don't know enough science, and the science, what's very interesting, he says the scientists only listen to music. So when you're saying that the poles of the dynamic are misdescribed. They've been perpetually misdescribed by this humanities versus STEM.
Deliberately, in a very partisan fashion,
right?
Misdescribed. So you go to the west arch entrance at Chartres,
right,
and at the Cathedral at Chartres, and you see the 7 liberal arts, which include the trivium and the quadrivium. They were not meant to be separate from each other. It was not meant to be Oxford versus Cambridge from a medieval standpoint.
I mean, but it's crazy that what was interesting to me was that McLuhan figured out, and that's like I think just a lot of people were still speaking in code, so I'm just trying to break this down. In the 12th century, people figured out. In the 12th century, McLuhan figured out that the big debates between the scholastics and the monastics, and so I study the monastic guys, and they're doing kind of poetic exegesis of scripture, right, which I love, and it's very mystical. It's where you get all the Victorine imagery that Bonaventure picks up on, and there's
they are experimenting with altered states.
Yes, but in the a lot of what we do in the Dragon Common Room, in our poetry writing fits with that monastic mode. But then, Abelard, people like Abelard come along, and Abelard really loves the yes and no of the debate and the dialectic. And what McLuhan very perceptibly figured out completely on his own, outside of, the actual medievalist scholarly conversation.
I have no evidence that he had any real help.
It was like
in figuring this
all
out.
by himself.
By the time he gets to his PhD, by the time he gets to his dissertation in St. Louis, he has some help.
Right.
But I think the original formulation of this was really him riding around on a bicycle with a compilation of poetry in his back pocket.
Excellent. And so he understood that what then later in the 20th century, in medieval terms, becomes the debate between scholasticism and monasticism was this debate within the trivium between the grammar and the dialectic, between the poetic and the logical, as it were. And what's interesting is that debate is actually the one that is at stake in most, continuing to be at stake in most modern academic debates. It's not between number and word necessarily. It's between this descriptive, willingness to go with metaphor and sort of what we call cultural history, right? And the social sciences, which are in this dialectic mode, which and the thing is that for academics like myself, it's very hard. It's like if you're used to thinking poetically, there's certain things that you can say that make sense to you and are real that in the dialectic mode don't exist. And I think vice versa.
And now I'm going to suggest something to you that may have never occurred to you before.
2 in 1 evening is going to be a lot.
that the most important communication that happens within not necessarily this generation, the Chinese elite, but the previous generation, the generation of the Chinese elite that came up with Mao, turns out to have been a generation of poets. And
how does that happen?
Well,
Wow.
well, it's very interesting. Poetry and painting are enormously important for that generation of Chinese communist leaders.
Interesting.
And this, I believe, has led to the following result. And I'm about to participate in a seminar next week on this very topic. It just is remarkable the way Western scholars who are primarily involved with the seminar have not even thought this was an important topic, let alone resolved it. Turns out today's Chinese leadership is not Confucian, it is Taoist.
The Chinese leadership right now,
Yes.
with Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping and those around him and those that he has organized into the Standing Committee of the Politburo, which is the cabinet, most important group. But it turns out that Xi Jinping is through multiple directions. I don't need to fill all the details out here, but it turns out that the Chinese have figured out there's no way they can stand up to Western technology without being Taoist. Confucianism simply cannot handle these technological developments. The Chinese have done an absolutely remarkable job, not flawless by any means, but a remarkable job of incorporating digital technology into what we would describe as a digitally enabled system. They have an operating system, deeply thought out. I was involved with them early on in aspects of this, which is why I get invited into some of these conversations. But in Western terms, it turns out that the conflict between grammar and dialectics has been soundly resolved in Chinese hierarchical political organization in favor of grammar.
What is it about Taoism that enabled that?
Taoism, Confucianism, and the Confucian Analects, and all of what surrounded it, I believe, had primarily to do with turning people into nobles, promoting a Chinese version of virtues in society, and that in turn has an important relationship to dreams and hallucinations of ancestors telling you what to do, and the disappearance of all of that. So this was, let's get an orderly society together.
That's the Confucian. Yes, it's harmony.
That's the Confucian approach, and it has been enormously important and will remain. It is not just Chinese. It's the idea that we can all be noble in our behavior. We can be virtuous in a Chinese sense. That is not what Taoism is about at all. Taoism is explicitly focusing on, let me understand nature. The first words of the Tao Te Ching are translated 100 different ways, but let me translate it on my own. That the Tao that can be turned into logic is not the real Tao.
So we have.
And it allows
No,
for
Felix Ruber had a quote from Mao in here, and he took it away before I could read it. Put it back. Go ahead, Casey.
It allows for more expansive thought.
It allows for, instead of trying to go out. So obviously what Confucianism is doing is it's fighting against this tendency in humanity to be corrupt and to tend towards Faustian bargain and sell your soul and so forth. So Confucianism is a bulwark against that. It's describing in great length how, in fact, this does not lead to a happy life for yourself or anybody else. That is not what Taoism was trying to do. Taoism was actually trying to understand, if you will, particle physics Taoism would have been those who would have said, in order for us to understand the way, the Tao, we must understand nature. We must do the natural thing. That was the origin of invention in ancient China, and it is today in charge. And I don't want to over dramatize this, but I actually know something about how senior Western leaders think about this. And this is simply not understood.
Okay, so
is
this
quite
is
remarkable.
I've got that we've got the within trivium distinction between the grammar and dialectic. One of the other
Yes.
things that my brother, who was organizing the Two Cultures conference, he reads Plato, and is very interested in Plato's myths.
Okay.
But he was showing me Arthur Herman's book on the cave and the light and the sort of Aristotelian Platonic tension in the Western tradition. And this, it seems to me, this is another significant of these elements, that Plato is, I mean, he's the source of a lot of what our mysticism, the kind of, ideas and certainly the Neoplatonic transcendence through the angelic hierarchies and things like that, which then
Right.
is more familiar in the early medieval tradition because of Augustine and the translations of Pseudo-Dionysius, and then the Aristotelian comes in, which you've definitely been thinking about because you're worried about the way Aristotle thinks about the soul and the faculties. That the Aristotelian tradition comes in strongly with the metaphysics and the psychology in the 12th and 13th centuries, which in some ways bangs into the mystical monastic tradition. And these, I'm not, with the grammatical seems to go more with the Platonic and the mythos storytelling, and the dialectical, certainly with the scholastic, fits more with the Aristotelian, the categories, and then the functions, right? You're gonna worry about the causes and which causes there. And McLuhan, it seems to me, you said I've been reading some of your stuff to prepare, that you worked more with Aquinas, and Aquinas is important for his efforts to bring Aristotle into the Western conversation. Right. Can you unpack some of that? And are there do we have parallels with the Tao Confucian in the Platonic Aristotelian, or are these just orthogonal or?
No, I would say the parallels are as just as straightforward.
Okay.
As you described it. It turns out that Plato, of course, has this very strong view about the forms.
Right.
The forms being transcendental. And Aristotle has a very different view of the forms. The forms are immanent in Aristotle. In fact, there are no substances without forms, which are a part of the whole exercise, hylomorphism.
Right.
So this is a tension within Western tradition that can never, of course, be resolved.
Right.
There is no answer to this. This is the answer to this is to recognize that contrast, and to then, in fact, incorporate it. But I would say the parallel here in gross terms is that Aristotle is Taoist. He's the one who invents biology, invents psychology. He is studying nature in order to approximate the Tao, the way. What is the natural way?
Right.
Whereas Plato writes the Republic, and I'll just mention this: if you said your brother is studying Plato, and in particular the parable of the cave.
Yes, he likes that a lot.
Well, I will say something that your brother might enjoy, and I'd be happy to talk with him apart from this. It turns out the origin of the parable of the cave is the reason why Socrates was killed. It turns out that the most important ritual in the mythic life of Athens was the Mysteries of Eleusis. The Mysteries of Eleusis required marching about 10 kilometers outside of the border of Athens to a port town of Eleusis, and in the process enduring a multi-day long annual religious ritual, which ended in a beer, a barley-based beer, which was laced with organic LSD.
Oh my! Oh, the fungus from the
ergot. It turns
yeah,
out that there was a law in and laws in this case means chiseled into stone sort of law, that the temple at Eleusis got the first fruits, the very first harvest from the fields outside of Athens. That meant it had a particular maturity or immaturity of alkaloids. And it turns out that first fruit was delivered to the temple and, in fact, infected with very specific strains of ergot.
Well, my.
The mold.
Okay.
In order to potentiate the end result to be a hallucinogenic, it stimulated the experience of psychic death and rebirth.
Wow.
The end result of this experience of death and rebirth, and by the way, there's a lot of books about this, a lot of documentation. I'm not making this all up, although I'm probably making some of it up. It turns out that this
Are we scribbling down notes right now?
Convinced the Athenian population that we were immortal. You could die and be reborn, which occurred in this event in the Telesteron, the big temple, open air temple, 5,000 people a year in Athens.
Big rave, eh?
And yeah. It was a big old rave.
They had music. Okay. All right. Yes. This fits with a lot of our research in Draco Chemicus.
It does. Yeah.
So Athens was a very weird place. For that other reason.
It was the Enlightenment classics and all, marble and reasonable, rational, right?
That too, right?
Exactly.
Sure, Jan.
My father was a historian of ancient mathematics, and he gave me a copy, which he inscribed to me, of Dodd's "The Greeks and the Irrational."
You're right. Yeah.
That's a very important entry into that conversation.
You've got our friend Mel excited now. Ergo, harps, Greeks. Okay. All right. So you were talking about why Plato, actually Herman in the Cave in the Light book has some photos of the cave that he thinks is the cave that Plato is describing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway, so you're going down into the cave, and then it's what you said. Socrates is killed because of this, and it turns into the most famous story.
Socrates, when you kind of summarize the accusations against Socrates, it winds up being a perversion of the youth. Religious.
That's what he did. Yeah.
That he was, and so I will now describe this as my interpolation of this. Socrates was saying to the Athenian youth, excuse me, he was saying to the Athenian youth, you don't have to propitiate Persephone. You don't have to participate in this Eleusinian mystery. You don't have to get mixed up with this whole Persephone, Hades nonsense. The crops will grow.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what did him in. And so Plato then winds up, of course, being the apologist. You killed my mentor.
Right.
And so I will describe what happened in the parable of the cave, where one man gets out into the light, comes back, and then winds up being murdered. Well, that's Socrates.
Right. But he's come out of the cave and said whatever, all the things that you see in that cave are an illusion.
Yes. But he goes back in. And that's Socrates returning after recognizing that the mysteries of Eleusis or whatever were just illusion. This is a ripe and vital area for us to investigate under digital conditions,
Mm-hmm.
because we no longer have to be bound by the relatively rigid mythological structures we came out of. Scholarship should flourish under these circumstances.
Okay, I've got a few. I'm putting down flagstones for everybody to follow along. Mel is now saying they eat the dogs, they eat the cats. Mel is one of our co-poets in the work that we're doing, so this is good. Okay, so I've discovered in our discussion yet another fracture, right? And so we have Aristotle thinks in terms of cause, and he has 4 causes: material, efficient, formal, and final. And one of the things that happens in modern science is we drop even thinking about 2 of those, right? We go for efficient and material.
I would argue,
but don't deal with formal and final anymore.
I would argue that event happened in the 17th century.
Right. So the thing is, we keep getting these fractures, right? And I know that one of your themes is reintegrating all of these things. So that
yes.
We said there's a fracture in the trivium between grammar and dialectic. There's a fracture in it. I don't even know what the fracture in the quadrivium is, because it's like quadrivium. It's like I have found numbers are hard to talk about, which is why we use numbers. And so there's a kind of inability for those of us who are verbally focused to deal with music and mathematics, right? It's just it falls out of our speech. So that's another fracture. But
that's right. You have a sword on the wall behind you, not a musical instrument.
Yeah. Indeed. And I'm no good at music. I keep trying to learn different musical instruments and it never happens, right? So we'll go for that. But then within the Aristotelian effort to, describe the Tao, as it were, we have had a fracture. And yes, in the 17th century, you stop asking why, so you don't have the final cause anymore. And you stop asking, I don't know whether how is the formal or not, but there's no purpose to anything. It's all efficient and material.
This, which there's an important aspect of this was only recently discovered. And this turns out to be a remarkably important organizing principle out of which modern science arises.
Okay.
And this is that taking advantage of the printing press environment, Descartes, and all the rest.
Right.
This winds up with really radically defined religious groups, Calvinist groups, who have no interest whatsoever in exploring the theological basis of what they're talking about. That's resolved. But they're really interested in the material aspects. So this separation between spiritual and material turns into the Royal Society of London. Many of the people involved with that, and if you read the original charter, which I think has been modified in its internet versions, I remember an earlier version, the original charter of the Royal Society of London is keep your goddamn theology to yourself.
Right. The physics gets completely separated out from the metaphysics. And yes. Okay, so the one layer, the manuscript problem comes out with the split within the trivium. The split within the Aristotelian causality comes out under the printing press, right? So we end up with physics and metaphysics split. And then I think when McLuhan's writing, he's in what you're describing as Ong's second orality, right? So that we're in the electric age of the telegraph and the radio and the television. And I liked what you said in your everybody, guys, you could go and look at the website for the Center for the Study of Digital Life, and a lot of this is very nicely diagrammed. That the television in particular is illusory, right? It's creating illusions. But that seems to me it's a subset, therefore, of the second orality of this electric age, which before our digital age was ephemeral, right? This is one of the things about, well, I guess the telegraph made traces on the paper, but
No, it was very deliberately ephemeral.
right.
The whole idea of recording, but more importantly, indexing television. Nobody in the beginning of television thought that would be interesting at all. Why the hell would we want to keep this stuff around?
You only want it live, or you only want it broadcast.
Right.
The cave. You needed it. You needed the shadows cast on the cave, the walls of the cave.
Right.
Yeah.
That is exactly the right analogy. The images on the wall, as described by Plato in the parable of the cave, but that's just the Republic. I mean, in terms of Plato trying to build a completely impossible world, just totally whacking himself out, not on understanding the world, but by making the world into his own view, of course, is the laws. The laws is when anybody asks me, well, what dialogue should I start with? I will regularly recommend to people, you want to know what Plato really thought? Read the laws. Mm-hmm. He's a crazy man. Trying to completely remake reality, human beings, and all the rest of it. So, and anyway, I'm an Aristotelian, so
good at Aquinas, right? But
I get away.
What I'm trying to make you do is be very sort of patient with us and not having all of these things all together at the same time, which is where we end up with the digital, I think. And this is what you were trying to explain to me when we first talked a few years ago. I mean, I appreciate we're in the digital now, and I think we need to explain the McLuhan tetrad. I hope we have enough context now for that. It's a little bit like, it's kind of modeled on the four causes, but it's not the same sort of problem of saying what happens in these new media environments, what happens in these new I mean, the problem is, of course, for McLuhan, everything's a medium. It's not just our communications media, roads, and there's transportation. I like his extensions of man image, right? It's like all of our technology extends us in some way, either physical or sensory, I suppose, right?
Psychological, very important.
Right, our physical and psychological extensions, and that all of it is working back on us, which I find that's actually, I mean, it's funny that it feels mystical for people, but to say, like, if you live in a city, the city's acting back on you. It's completely constructed by human beings, right? People made all these buildings, they made all the roads, they made all the, amenities and the high rises and all of it, the entire environment, and then it works back on you. That seems to me to be a fairly straightforward claim, but McLuhan, he constantly had this problem of people saying, oh, well, that sounds mystical, and it's like, well, it means, and I think Tolkien was good at talking about this, right? The way our tech acts on us, it can feel magical because we're not able to explain why our artifacts have the effects on us that they do.
I think it's fair to say that McLuhan's life purpose, once he figured this out, was to try to break that spell.
But the thing is, can we? Right? That's say I mean, the primary environment that we're in is nature, right? God planted us here, and that clearly works on us. I mean, we're in relationship with nature. We're in the rivers and the mountains, and I mean, so much of our spiritual language is about our relationship with our natural environment. I mean, but the thing is, in our spiritual tradition, we're in.
Your question, Rachel, is that our ability to deal with media, with the effects of media, with the shaping of ourselves by media, As John Culkin, SJ, the man who invited McLuhan to Fordham, said famously, we shape our tools and thereafter they shape
Right.
us.
Right.
Mhm.
So there's no qualification in that about, well, is it possible to somehow escape from this exercise? I believe that McLuhan devoted his life to helping us to escape from that. And the main way that he illustrated this sort of possibility of escape is in things like his deep adoption of the 1841 Edgar Allan Poe Sent into the Maelstrom. So I'm going to recommend for everybody who's watching us, listening to us, that you take a look at that. It is the story of a maelstrom, of course, is an upside down tornado. It's in the middle of the ocean, but it's a revolving and destructive force. And boats that bridge this tend to be sucked down and destroyed. So it's a story. Obviously, if someone's writing a story about this, he must have survived to write the story. But the
Spoiler.
But the survivor.
Well, this is his cave story in a way. Okay.
Yeah, this is exactly his. But he's playing a Socrates here because he survives.
Right.
He doesn't walk back into the thing and get murdered by the people in the theater. He survives, and how does he survive? Not to spoil the story to anybody, is he finds something more important than himself, which lifts him up. So the particular mechanics of how that happens in the story, I'll leave to your own imagination as you read it. But I'm quite confident that McLuhan repurposed Poe's story to refer to the church.
Okay, yeah, we had the spoiler alert there, right? Is he's actually Catholic, and they're very serious, very seriously Catholic. The medium as the message is, the Word became flesh, like, flat out, right? Yeah, which he never says out loud, except for occasionally in essays. The medium and the light is great. I really enjoyed those essays.
Medium and the Light is a volume put together by his son Eric McLuhan, who was a friend of mine. To highlight these materials, and supposedly there's a volume 2, which may get published someday.
So that would be nice. Okay, so in the Maelstrom story, that's in the beginning of the Mechanical Bride, right?
I actually don't recall where it first appears in McLuhan's work, but it winds up becoming a through line.
Yeah, that he repeats these things. Okay, so the backing up again. I have to keep making you back up because I know everybody. It's like, and we're having Felix Ruber, who is giving us quotations from the laws. Magnesia will have a population of slaves and foreigners who carry out necessary tasks forbidden to citizens, such as trading and menial labor. Yes, if you want to be Platonic, the slaves are going to be doing the menial labor. Oh, they're talking about saying if you allow the audience to study the trick too long, the charm can be lost. Sir Real Nil Mill saying it's like when new conspiracy theorists find out that this fabled rabbit hole we all refer to is just the magician's top hat. That's good. Okay, so McLuhan, he's trying to understand how we are inside and outside. And I think we need to explain the tetrad, because we're still now at this place where you have the oral becomes the written, which then becomes the printed, which then becomes the second orality, in which we're in the digital. But at each of these stages, I mean, it's like we feel things are being lost. But then this is what you were trying to explain to me back in, the digital retrieves the medieval. To me, I'm happy if anything retrieves the medieval. So that sounded great to me. But it's there's a more
how does it retrieve
there's more
medieval?
Structure to it. Yeah, we need more structure to that.
The primary effect of digital technology is to reintegrate.
See, that's why I liked it.
This is why Habermas can have a series of meetings with Ratzinger and later Benedict XVI, and they can write a book out of this, which is simply about what is missing. I mean, the recognition that there's something fundamental that's missing. We're now, one of the major projects of CSCL is something called Triview University. So we're on a 3-year rotation of curricula. And much of what Rachel's talking about, because we've written about it, is the first year. That's behind us now. We're now in the middle of new sciences.
Okay.
So the basic format is new paradigm, new sciences, new leaders. So next year we'll get around new leaders, but now we're in the midst of new sciences. And this is just a classic scientific revolution we're in the middle of now. Nothing of, quote, settled science works anymore.
Yeah,
right.
That's
it's a
oxymoronic.
remarkable time to be living for that and many other reasons. So the net of this winds up being a change in human nature. Human nature is quite plastic based on the environment, but we're changing the character of humanity because the underlying environment has changed. And that is a kind of a self-reinforcing process. One of the results of this, I think, is going to be a re-examination, literally, of every scientific proposal. And I don't know, does this wind up in everybody gets richer? Does this wind up everybody gets happier? I don't know what the answer to that is. Probably not any of that. But we're waking up in a very interesting way. And that's, I think, was McLuhan's goal. He's one of these people who I would describe as, I wish he was alive today. He was pushing a rock up a hill in his own life, and now we have to worry about landslides.
So I think we're getting to the place where I can ask you the questions about Trump and stuff like that. But that you said that I'm glad you brought in the examples with China, that we've gone from a world that the television and the global satellite. We had some fun media things, but I don't want to mess up our audio by showing pictures. So just keep with this. That the global world comes from the electric world of. I mean, that kind of interconnection. I mean, between the telegraph and the radio and the satellites and the television, right, that we can think in terms of there is this one world with this one, and that certainly in McLuhan's lifetime, certainly in the 50s, right? There's nothing but the language about, the world civilization. It's like the great books that came out of the University of Chicago based but not sponsored project that Adler did was with Hutchins did his introduction to it, and it's all when you read it now in retro, you realize they're constantly talking about this world civilization. They want the great books because they want the world to be all this one thing. Whereas now we're clearly in a situation where that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it can't. And you had it described as there's the East, which we've talked about a bit with the Taoism and the Confucianism, but that there's the East, the West, and the digital. And I wanted a picture. You have a sort of 3 globes in the imagery on the website, which is very, very nice. We have like David Bowie juggling the balls. 3 crystal balls, right? That they're these 3 in dynamic. And I had a conversation earlier with one of the Gen Zers, right? And I was saying, well, our guest tonight has described our present world as divided to East, West, and digital. And I say online is real place. And he says, online is not a real place. The internet is like that part of the deep sea that has an endless stream of dead fish falling into it. Real life happens in the sunlit and pelagic zones. Very little that is qualitatively new happens online, especially when compared to the man hours spent online. And I'm like, oh, that's great. It's like our sailing on our ark, right? We're in the Mosaic ark in the internet, right? And this image is suggesting like most of the ocean is dark, and nobody's living. All the living happens on the continental shelf next to, right? My friend goes on, it's the part of the ocean that is 99% dead stuff from the living part of the ocean. That's the internet. Probably that's the problem. The internet's a real place to the extent that it's a graveyard is a town hall. I think it, so the people, and this is someone who's grown up in the digital, and a lot of what's happening with the kids these days is they're rejecting this online place as the illusion, right? It's like that there's this cave-like thing that they want to be
in a transition from a paradigm based on imagination, fantasy, to a paradigm based on memory. And the internet is in between. It's it's a transition from television to digital. I mean, it turns out that so much of what we call the internet is just a poor replica of a television show, because everybody's become a broadcaster.
Like we are now.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And here we are.
And this, I mean, we'd always say, the new media, the content of the new media is the old media. So that makes sense, right? It's like they're printing the manuscript content. A lot of what happens on the radio and the television is making, movies out of books. And now you're saying the television content, the content is this, but it's in the environment of the internet, digital. Or the internet is the media. I do appreciate now, I think a lot better than I did when I first talked to you, there's layers of what the environment is. I mean, this fundamentally right now, we're in sand. I mean, say because of the light and the fiber optic cables and the glass and it's like what we're surrounded by environmentally is sand.
My best guess is that we're still 20 plus years away from this becoming a much better, widely understood phenomenon. I spend a lot of my time at Triview and elsewhere talking to what I guess, I'm close to 77, so this is kind of stupid for me to say this, but 20-somethings. I have two children. They're 40-somethings. They're millennials.
Okay.
But I am so optimistic about generations to come. It just appears to me to be inevitable that they will be formed differently and react differently. And if I'm right, we wind up living a more integrated life. By integrated, I mean form plus matter. So the trivium and the quadrivium are the 7 liberal arts. They aren't two totally different colleges. They're not Oxford and Cambridge.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same educational process. And that's where I think we're heading. This is the retrieval of the medieval in at least the sense of being far more integrated. But it's more than that. As it turns out, both India and China and other places have become, from the top to the bottom, sort of saturated with their own traditions.
Mm-hmm.
So is this the availability of these things to people? Is that what you mean?
Could not be done without the internet. Absolutely could not be done without digital. So today in China, Chinese classics are taught starting in elementary school.
Lovely.
When I first went to China in 1997, so that's 27 years ago. One of the first things I did is I went to the main bookstores and tried to find Confucius. By the way, Chinese, of course, that's not the correct name. The correct name is Kongzi. So I tried to find Kongzi. I tried to find Lotzi. And this is very difficult to do. You go today to the Wangfuzhang bookstore at the base of the main shopping street, just next to the Imperial City. And there are 7 different editions of each of these works available. Mm-hmm. You still can't buy a Bible. It's illegal to buy a Bible in China. But Chinese classics, Chinese have come to the point that they have, many people are convinced that the Western classics are the result of the Silk Road and influence from the East. Shady Barsh, classics scholar, I think. Classics.
Yeah, she's one of my friends.
Oh, you know her?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. I believe, Neoplatonic scholar. Would that be the right description, or?
I mean, I think of her. She's also done a recent translation of the Aeneid, and she works. Okay. She works as Augustan and Silver Age Latin. Yeah,
that makes sense. University of Chicago actually married, I think, to the president.
Yes.
Of the University of Chicago.
With the former president.
Okay.
He
recently published.
He died. You know that, right?
No, I didn't know.
No, Robert Zimmer died a few years ago.
Oh dear. Okay. Yeah. Well, she recently
last year
completely immersed herself in learning at least written Mandarin Chinese, participated in a great range of online publications, and published a book called Plato Goes to China. Fascinating book. So the way the Chinese are approaching Eastern and Western classics, it extends all the way through the educational system. Something similar is happening in India under Modi. These are retrievals of the medieval in their own context. So medieval isn't just a Western. I hope you would agree.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a
well, actually, Shadi's actually Iranian descent, so it makes sense. She's from the Silk Road.
Yes, right. Right.
Okay, so this is one of our previous guests, Evita Duffy, was just talking today on her radio show about the medieval she's in her 20s, right? She's early 20s, mid 20s now. The whatever factionalism that we describe ourselves now as right or left or conservative or whatever, it's like the younger people, they're fascinated by the medieval and the traditional Mass Catholics and the sort of desire for older traditional forms. Yes. And that kind of retrieval, this is what's funny for me is people are saying, oh, we don't know anything anymore. And I'm like, we have access to everything in a way no previous civilization has ever had. It's like we're frenzied at the sense of I can look it up, right?
It's in your pocket.
Preparing for any of our streams is me going online, going how many, all of that, and that just within my own field, on the one hand, European studies are out of fashion, and people aren't majoring in the fields and such anymore. But on the other hand, we've been in my professional career, we've been in an absolute golden age of translation. All of these texts that were only available in Latin, when McLuhan was doing his research, I have books and shelves and shelves and shelves of new translations of texts that had not ever been translated into English that now you can assign in class.
And it's available to people
who aren't 20th. I'm sorry.
Sorry, it's available to people who aren't academics too. There's a Telegram channel I like to browse through every day. I don't know where he gets it from, the person who runs his channel, but he's turning all these old books, old Irish books in Irish Gaelic and in English, both about the history of Ireland and the poetry of Ireland and the mythology of Ireland for like a couple of centuries. And he just keeps loading these up every week. So it's like you have a private Irish history library right there at your fingertips, and it doesn't cost anything either. It really is quite amazing. Anybody who has any kind of interest in any kind of history or literature or poetry, it's at your fingertips. It's extraordinary.
I work off of footnotes of footnotes of footnotes. So I wind up in an archive pretty quickly. And it just completely amazes me, the amount of material that's available online. I'll get stumped from time to time, but just a couple of years ago, I'd run into roadblocks on my amateurish sort of research. There's an army of people out there who are finding this.
Awesome.
And this, I've talked about this on our stream before, but the research I've been doing this last year on this one particular Florentine Franciscan who was writing about Mary, and not only can I see the
What is the time period here?
Late 13th century, Servus Sanctus of Faenza. He's fascinating. Okay. It's like the sort of.
I wound up spending 10 days in Florence trying to understand the various roles, but Savonarola winds up being remarkably important.
Well, Servus Sanctus is a couple.
They're supposed to be Platonic economy and everything is going secular or pagan or something or other. Savonarola, he's a big deal.
Well, this is Servus Sanctus Servus Sanctus is probably one of the Franciscans that Dante learned from. So there you go. Right. But that I can see not only the manuscript of his work that was in the library at Santa Croce, because it's now in the Lawrenciana, has been digitized, but I'm also, interested in, okay, so what did he have access to in Santa Croce? Oh, they've digitized those manuscripts too. And then I'm thinking, okay, so there's this, homiliary that in the homiliary, it says it's the sermons by Paul the Deacon, but no, I look it up, and in fact, it's by Ambrosius Autpertus, and I need to know whether or not this particular idea that Servus Sanctus is using, would he have had access to it? And the very idea that I'm interested, it's the form of God, right? It's like whether or not Mary is made to the form of God. There's a mark by it. Digitally, I can see it, right? And there's a mark, a reading mark. It's like someone marked this book that was at Santa Croce I'm like, am I seeing? I mean, we have other contexts in which we know Servus Sanctus is making comments on things, and you feel this, the retrieval of, because they've digitized all these manuscripts, this kind of, it would obviously be better to go look at the actual book, but the sort of access to the visual version of these manuscripts, people 10 years ago couldn't do this. It's no. the level of knowledge that's now simply available online is overwhelming. And so
it is. Yeah. 50 years, so 30 something years ago when I was still in college. And I was assisting my professor in some research she was doing, and she had to get photocopies from one of the universities in England sent over, and then she had to take those and put them into some kind of computer program so she could analyze it. But other than that, you had to have a lot of money and get on a plane and go over there and borrow their documents. Right. So few people could do that, and now anybody can do it. They may not know what they're doing or how to do it, but they can do it. They can learn it.
Huh. Yeah, and
I think they are. Yeah. As Rachel was just describing her recent engagement with some Gen Z researcher, that's exactly what they're doing.
Right. So it's all out there, and I'm happy that you're hopeful, because that's the right thing to be as Christians. But that this is, I mean, we're sort of overwhelmed by the. This is where I get more hopeful with the AI problem of, the large language models and stuff like that. That one of the things you're interested in is like the degree to which we're able to see patterns, and the fantasy of the large language models is that they're going to be able to do this kind of, I mean, nobody ever says this, like this kind of pattern recognition. What we feel as creativity tends to be putting things together. I mean, it's composition, right? It's putting things together that haven't been put together before and that reveal new levels of understanding. And this is where the degree to which we are either we're going to be overwhelmed and taken over by robots. Like, for whom? I don't understand. For whom are these robots going to be working? The three guys who want to rule what, right? I don't get that. The only reason to have the sort of fantasy of this compilation is somehow making the pattern tracing easier, but our sense of pleasure and delight and aha comes from my saying, okay, I have access now because of the digitization to that manuscript. I have this problem that I'm trying to solve about what this guy was thinking, and I can put this. I don't see how a language model does that.
No, I can't. My godfather and the mentor to my father, the historian of science that I've described, was Norbert Wiener, the man who coined the term cybernetics. Oh. And Norbert Wiener was, according to my father, I've actually written this up in an essay for IEEE, published in 2014. But anyway, this is Wiener's genius project. But he was very pessimistic about the people who were around him. Late 40s, early 50s, after World War II, there were many other imperatives that were really driving things. And so because I'm, I guess it's almost like a grandfather of some sort, my father's mentor, but I get to watch movies that were made in 1948, and they sort of make sense to me as the way people were thinking in those days. And he was very upset. But he said, if we do our work right now, someday somebody's going to come along and pay attention to what we're doing. That's what's happening right now, is everybody is starting to pay attention. There are millions. I believe there are millions of people today who are paying attention in a way that just wasn't true a couple of years ago.
Yes.
Quite remarkable.
That there's the catalyst has, well, the degree to, I do want to talk about Trump a little bit if we can, because that's how
I was going to say,
go ahead.
Being locked up for 3 years made people pay attention even more because they had nothing else to do. So,
well, pushed us all online for sure. In this, I mean, that
it was
that
all
we
online,
found each other online to be doing the poetry that we're working with, and that we're doing these meetups online, which feel real, right? I think there's a reality Casey and I finally met actually in person. Mel and I met in person, but it was
like we already had met. It was because we talked so often. It was just so natural. It was strange.
It was nice to have the real world coming into the digital world coming into the real world of our friendship and that happening. I was having another thought. I'm thinking about the retrieval. Well, yeah, because I wanted. This is that Mark sort of intervened on my Facebook. Now I can't remember what I'd actually said, but it was like suddenly everybody started putting out this, like, we've got this. Someone was saying this Gamergate goes to government now. Right?
Yeah, that all started with
that and there are a variety of things that I've noticed. Incidentally, one, like, everybody's watching all the cabinet picks, riveted, and
yes.
that could not have ever possibly happened before.
Exactly.
Who the hell would have cared?
Right.
True.
Right. So we said that we know who all these people are. We have the kind of evidence that would have only ever presented maybe to the Senate. Who knows, right? It's like there's this whole other layer of our ability to engage.
We're now all of a sudden we're all on the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah.
There was the
among
television
all
channel.
the rest of the things we do.
There was a television channel that used to televise it live, and I'm trying to remember what it was called now because it just got
Well, C-SPAN. C-SPAN is
C-SPAN. Thank you.
traditional
Yeah,
cable channel. There are
right.
multiple C-SPAN channels, but
That's when it
Well,
started, but it's nothing to this level. But everybody can watch it 24 hours a day and watch multiple interviews on different
Right.
devices within an hour. And yes, I know who 5 nominees are for 5 different cabinet positions.
Yeah,
You know?
like, and even 5 years,
Strange.
4 years ago, it's like they get put out there. People, react in different ways, and you're like, oh, I don't even know what they're talking about. And this time around, I mean, I'll say some of them I do know in person because I've met them, so that gives me one level of engagement. But even there's been so much conversation for so many years now about so many of these players in this particular performance that we are in fact engaged digitally at a completely different level from, and I'm wondering therefore about this was not planned, but thinking about the degree to which we are not fragmented, because I think we're still in lots of little subsets of the online conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's the digital of all the scanning and the books and the retrieval of information that's all suddenly available out there, but you still need to know how to deal with it. Think about it. Look for patterns. There's I know how to look for the manuscripts, but that doesn't, I didn't figure that out, completely, like without any background or teaching.
Mm-hmm.
No, your description of this as performance, I think, is correct. If it's on television, and very often if it's online, it's just a performance, and the inclination that we're on, the rate of change that's going to happen, we're going to wind up in a situation where we're just going to have to, be forgiving of people's confusion. We all know a lot of people who become very upset, and some maybe even seriously off kilter as a result of this. We're on a very steep trajectory here. This is going to be quite different a couple years from now.
So why are people upset? What's upsetting about this? Is it simply the flood of information? Is it I mean, you're trying to. I mean, I feel I'm exhausted. You're like trying to remember everything all the time. So there's that the digital as memory. The integration. I mean, the people are finding it difficult to. I have sensed that being a medievalist and retrospectively realizing I've been McLuhany all along, that a lot of the sense of the which side, the feeling of being only on one side of the picture constantly. I'm like, well, I'm more familiar with this problem of finding yourself in a new frame, I suppose. But why are people going to find it so upsetting?
We're homeostatic creatures. we're built for stability. Many people describe it as survival, but I think stability is probably or balance is so therefore something which is aggressive and challenging. It should be a problem. You don't want a population to just shift around minute to minute based on what's happening. You want some sense of why are you making such a big change right now?
Yeah.
By and large, I mean the so-called progressive tendency is finished. There's no possibility of recovery at this point. We're heading into a situation, I would suggest, where the basic approaches will orient around I may be exaggerating this because LLMs have turned out to be what they should have been, a short-term but sigmoid curve, just a rise up and then a plateau. So everybody's coming to the same conclusion about LLMs now, that they're not going to be exponential. They've leveled off. But that we're still facing the challenge of robots. And the primary reason, I believe, why we're facing that challenge is the military. The military can no longer afford dead humans.
Yeah.
It's just no longer socially acceptable. So
100 years of nonstop war. Yeah, people don't want it. And they're getting very angry at people who treat it very cavalierly in government, or people running for positions in government.
My first note, we have a EXO digital bomb Substack. My first note on this was Trump has to win if he's the peace candidate. And it didn't sound that way 6 months ago, but he finished off as the peace candidate.
Yeah.
So therefore, robots fighting wars against other robots is pretty close to where we're coming in Ukraine. The drones are robots, and the whole warfare has shifted over to this drone robot exercise. They're not completely autonomous, or are they? But in any event, this is a very, very different circumstance across the board. The Catholic Church that I grew up in when I was a teenager, junior high school teenager, was called Our Lady of Peace. I happen to know that the Department of State at the Vatican and its efforts have been probably the most relentless over a long period of time, pushing for peace, whatever else you might think about the Vatican, which is it's a bureaucracy which isn't quite ready for the shift that we're going through, but there'll be no choice. So here we are. And depending on which way you're facing, forward or backwards, it's going to look very different. But that too will change. That has to change over time. So the answer to your question, why are people so upset, is because they think of themselves as a good person. They do not believe themselves to be a sociopath or evil. And they thought they were on the right path. And the recognition that that's not the right way to go, which is kind of now more and more obvious. I mean, the idea that, as came by today in one of the posts that was on my feed, the idea that being liberal is now the resistance.
Yeah.
This is remarkable phraseology in these sorts of things. These are amongst not only the most important causes, formal causes of change, but they have a certain inevitability built into them. So you don't have to be a Hegelian to have some confidence that you kind of know what's going to happen over the next 10, 20 years. But it seems quite unlikely that this trajectory, which brought us the election last week, I wrote a essay on our Substack, EXO Digital Bomb, now 4 or 5 months ago, maybe 2 months ago, which said that the paradigms, the shift from a television fantasy world to a digital memory world, are on the ballot, and not just in the United States.
Yes.
I mean, it's all around the world. These elections are happening, and they're all coming up with more or less.
They are.
The same.
And
Well,
the governments are trying.
Go ahead.
The governments are trying in Europe and in this country. It still shocks me that they tried it. They're still trying it. They're trying to rein it in. They're trying to rein this kind of digital, memory revolution in, where people are seeing. It's not just a 24-hour news cycle. It's like, I mean, that phrase itself doesn't even quite capture the amounts of information people had available to them when they were making decisions on voting. It's really incredible. And they've been trying to say, well, we want to pass laws against misinformation, which begs the question, of course, well, who decides what's misinformation? Oh, we do. Right. By the way, we're on the ballot, vote for us.
Yeah,
it was just kind of obvious to so many people all at once.
Well, that's the fake. I mean, even 2016, right? When the present version. I mean, I feel like I've been having this feeling this past week of I feel like I've aged 8 years in a day. Because
it's a rough day.
It's bad, right? Because I mean, all of this started with 2016, and it feels like something's close. I mean, we've had some closure on that 8 years, right? Of the refusal to hear what some of us were saying back in 2016. It's like my colleagues in academia and in history in particular were very, very anxious about the fake news stuff, right? It's like, but what do we trust? Which newspapers do we read? And my department 8 years ago, I wrote this up in one of my blog posts, had a seminar after Trump's first electoral victory, saying, what do we do? What do we do? Who do we trust? And, my colleagues were saying, well, New York Times, right? And you realize that, they're defaulting to this problem of, I need to know from the editorial position of this particular publication, they're trustworthy. And I'm sitting there as a medievalist, used to, having to deal with stories of wild things happening and what we consider our most scientific historians going, right? You have to learn how to do it yourself. You have to learn how to judge the kinds of information you're getting from where, what sort of story is it, what kind of frame is it working within. But this doesn't, remove the reality of, and it could be mystical as the most real thing that you're experiencing, this sense of being transported into or out of particular states of understanding. And that for modernists, the people trained in the modern expectation of evidence and authenticity, or not authenticity, authority, it was very, very troubling, right? That they were not happy with it. And they certainly weren't happy with the medievalist going, over here. Right.
Well, I agree with Mark, but he said that people want stability. It's like, why did you change that? Why is Walter Cronkite not telling me this is the way it is?
Right.
Right. I need to hear this because it's comforting to me. And when I think it's quite a bit of cognitive dissonance that was going on, I think, over the past 4 years with misinformation, people didn't want to believe it. These are smart people.
Right.
These are very smart people. They didn't want to believe it because it's very, very upsetting to their what has been the comforts of their whole life thus far.
It turns out that maybe a bit more behind the scenes, but not totally. I mean, a number of people have noticed, and I think this is probably worth somebody paying closer attention, maybe somebody on the inside. New York Times today does not read the same way it read 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's an adjustment immediately underway. When I was, it turns out my next door neighbor, I think, has won multi-tens of $1,000s bet that Trump would win. And part of that is
for him.
all of his friends were quite convinced that the governors of the swing states voters out to vote against Trump. Of course, none of which actually happened. So he cleaned up, and he actually, I predicted in 2016 that Trump would win. And actually published on the Sunday before the first votes were counted, not votes, actually, caucus results were voted in New Hampshire in 2016. And I just said it's because Trump is much more organized. He actually has a strategy for this. and the time is right. Well, the time has only become more and more right. And so under these circumstances, I think there's a lot of people who are, in their own way, kind of difficult to do publicly, but maybe more privately. There's a whole lot of minds that are surprising themselves
Mm.
at the rate at which they're changing here. Reality has a way of doing that to you.
You
But only if
adjust
you're already
to fit reality, because otherwise, yes, it's
but you
quite dangerous not to.
time for it. Something must have happened to you before this. These sorts of crystallization events, or seeding sort of events, require a kind of a saturation that precedes it, and so the trust numbers and whole wide range of ways that people attempt to measure these things, we're ready to make some important changes. So this is, as it turns out, many, because I'm an ex-Wall Street analyst, I still have a fair number of contacts in that world. They made their peace with Trump last summer.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Wall Street was ready to go with Trump. This will be fine. But beyond that, there's some. I have some remote multi bank shot connections into some fairly serious people in Washington. They're ready for a change. This is not ostrich time in very interesting circles, business, politics, national security. There's been a lot of discussion on some of the blogs that I look at that the probably one of the largest organized forces against widening war today is the Pentagon. In part out of recognition that they can't accomplish many of these tasks.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's entirely that operational. I think there's something very interesting is happening in military, business, political circles as a result of all of this, and so it's again, landslides are more likely than pushing a rock up a hill, which we've all
right.
We're all mature enough to have spent a lot of our lives pushing rocks uphill. That doesn't feel to me like today.
And now it's the landslide. So in immediate things, I was thinking how we've sort of been building to this all along. The sort of tone of certain kinds of conversations have changed. But Obama, everybody loved Obama because he, had a kind of what people felt then was, an ability to be in the media as it was at that point. It was right. 2008 was like right when I got on Facebook, right? It's like just the social medias are just coming in, and everybody said, he organized really well, and there's all this social media. And of course, then when Trump comes along in 2016 and does Twitter, and I think that the Democrats had thought, okay, we know how to do this game, and Trump comes along and use it.
He really blindsided
them with his tweets, which I'm recognizing now. I mean, I was reading my colleague Casey Mulligan's book about what it was like being on the CEA. I forget exactly how it said, the Economic Advisory Committee, right? He's saying that
Council Economic Advisors. That's my code of CEA.
That's it. That's the Council of Economic Advisors. It's Casey Mulligan, and he did a book on what it was like. He worked on that council for a year, 2018, 2019. And he was describing the way in which they would, be having discussions within the CEA about, different kinds of economic decisions they would be making. And the way, it's not Trump himself, but his staff guy would tweet something, And it would be either, I mean, it might be exactly what they were saying they were going to do. It might be an exaggeration. It might be, he was using the tweets to test public response.
Yeah, that's
right.
genius.
It's like, oh, he's crazy. And the thing is, so they're like, he's like sending flares out, or, you know, they're pings or something, right? It's like social radar. How do people respond? And then he would, you know, act on the basis of what he learned. It's like they were test shots. And he clearly, I mean, it's interesting that 2020 was different because we were all in the internet completely because of the lockdowns. Coming back this time around, he clearly, the rallies were very important. Like, people saw him in person a lot, which is therefore a situation where he could get shot, potentially. But also, you know, he was going on the podcast. I think Tucker Carlson saying that, I not, you know, quite fully appreciate. Joe Rogan, he says, invented the podcast, but it, you know, creates this kind of format that we're in now, the genre of being online and television, that the online creates a possibility of, we can just sit here and talk for as long as we want. We'll let you go in a minute. But that, you know, that created a whole nother layer of, never mind the illusion of what you're going to be able to project if you carefully edit it and cropped it and film it in studio and stuff. It's like, we're doing this in our homes for hours. And so you create a completely different ability for people to record this long conversation, remember it, go back to it, look at it again, share it out. And Trump obviously was, you know, able to do that one this time too, since and Tucker was out there doing his stage show with recordings, and everybody could watch those. It's like the quantity transforms the quality at some point.
What Tucker did also reminds me of old religious revivals in the country.
Oh yeah,
going
tent
around
meetings
to huge crowds. Oh yeah,
total tent meetings.
It's it definitely had that flavor. Trump's didn't. His just has the flavor of a very successful political rally, you know. But Tucker's was a bit different because he would come out on a stage. There would be people in the audience, like you said, under the big tent.
Oh yeah,
right?
they were tent meetings.
And he would give his message out because he's not running for any office. That's why he would be more like the preacher than the politician.
Well, he has one note of, obviously it's lying. And that just continues all the way through to whatever I saw come across today. But that's a very under these circumstances, after having been lied to for so long and everybody knowing it, to just simply have somebody like Tucker, whose entire point is stop lying to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Just stop lying.
Just doesn't matter what you say. Just stop lying.
Please tell me the truth, and I can know. Yeah. So Robert is saying Tucker reinvented the realization, which is this is the retrieval of the oral in different ways is interesting to me, because it's not oral because it's recorded, right? So it's there's a stability to it that the radio didn't have for most of us.
There's a persistence to it. Yes, but it's like these collective meetings. This is what I'm thinking about. One, that the younger people are very interested in having real, like, life stuff, right? Us, you know, those of us who grew up in the 80s, we did have like real life stuff, and then we ended up on the line. Some of them, most of their friendships start online. I mean, ours do too now, but you know, the feeling of wanting to have a ground in the physical is very, very powerful.
It is. I've noticed it too. Yeah.
Authenticity, honesty, enormously important.
Yeah.
Under these circumstances, and that we're beginning to sort of step into virtues in this process.
Yes.
And so the retrieval of a medieval sense of virtues, which is certainly not to say that overall medieval society was virtuous, and so it's a very messy period, as every period is quite messy.
Well, he said the concept of, so we have a little bit more of Peter Bergman says Joe Rogan got it from Tom Green, Canadian public access superstar. So that actually makes sense. Yeah. And he's saying, I wonder how much McLuhan Tom Green knows. I know he's a fan. And Felix Ruber's The Fireside Chats were a podcast. Right. So I mean, we're extending the possibility of the media. And of course, I mean, Ms. Harris made a big mistake not being able to go on Rogan, because that means you can't interact in this world. You can't go on.
But she can't.
Right.
She famously can't. Everything has to be very tightly scripted. And even then, it was very difficult for her to get through a conversation with somebody. It's just not her strength at all. In fact, it's a terrible weakness.
Well, and it's a terrible weakness
in
this media environment, which is I mean, we like doing the live stream because it means you this is it. I say I don't edit it. I stop recording, feed it to my YouTube, and there it is. Right, it's what we've said, and that. Even with our, fumbles on this one, it's like all of it's part of it. It actually matters that we made mistakes in creating this artifact.
We just don't lie about them.
Right. We're not lying about it. It's like I fumbled this, or that happened, or the tech, the experience with the tech is actually also part of it, because although we've created some degree of illusion with the OBS screens and things like that, that's why people like Joe Rogan's 3-hour-long conversations, you feel like you're in a real engagement that just actually happened the way you're watching it.
Yeah, it's like walking into a pub and seeing two guys talking. You're like, what do they say? That sounds interesting.
I'd like to sit down.
It's very intimate.
Okay, so we've done our 2 hours now, so we will now let you go to bed. But I have a few more comments from our viewers. Rogue Wave saying authenticity is the key in the new internet atmosphere. It's interesting because we know how to create all the illusions now. The AI can generate off images constantly. The wanting to see the actual interaction is necessary there. And Peter Bergman saying virtue. I'm reminded by Bernie Sanders talking about justice at Liberty University, of all places, before he was burned by the DNC. There's some interesting convergences going on between Sanders and Trump right now.
Well, remember who was on the DNC when that was happening to Bernie? Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh my gosh! Well, we're gonna have some strange bedfellows in all of these engagements. Yes. Well, we're gonna be holding everybody's feet to the internet. We're gonna be watching. And don't believe the army of autists isn't going to notice. Right?
Oh, yeah. We're all 4chan now.
Gamer, the ride never ends. So, Mark, this is, I hope you've enjoyed this. We very much appreciate you fitting to our time for streaming, and I'm grateful to that. Do you have anything that you'd like to end with, and remind everyone where to find you, and last words?
Yes. The primary website we have is the Center for the Study of Digital Life, which is digitallife.center. My email address is different from that, but if you wish, info@digitallife.center or info@exogenous will get to me. We have three major projects. We're running an online graduate school called Trivium University. University happens to be a top-level domain, so trivium.university. So info at that, but also info@exogenousinc.com will get to me. Exogenous Inc. is our geopolitical advisory firm, and it's quite remarkable the number of people who are ready to actually begin to think about some of these things. So do not overly enthusiastic. Trump is a jerk, and doesn't deserve.
What's your last word? Trump is a jerk.
But as Steve Bannon described him, he's a perfect vessel for what's going on at this point. What's going on? Really radical paradigm shift. It could be described as a scientific revolution. could be described in a number of ways. We are all fortunate to be living in these very interesting times, which is not a Chinese proverb. It is a fortune cookie from San Francisco.
Oh, drat!
It's a first. No, don't tell me
It's
that.
a cookie.
So thank Rachel and Kimberly for this opportunity to talk to your friends.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Night.